Hello and welcome to the Record Players. Today we're going to be discussing the topic of how to fix the streaming service payout problems that are currently plaguing streaming services. I guess internationally, but I've heard this in particular with reference to Nile Rodgers coming out recently saying uh, how abysmal the earning rate for each cycle of a song is because of the system set up by the major record labels. Um, so the way that it works at the moment, for anyone who's not sure, is that per play of a song on Spotify or Apple Music or something like that, the artist earns a small percentage of the money earned by that play. The record company earns the majority of the money because the way the contracts are set up, that play is treated as if it's a purchase for which the record company gets the majority of money, whereas for a play, a something like that, that's a different revenue source. The artist would have had higher revenue. So Noel Rogers in particular is calling out Sony, Universal, and Warner Brothers as kind of the major labels, saying that they're probably the worst offenders for all of this. There's also, from a Guardian article that we'll link down below, a songwriter who saying they've written hit songs, but they've seen only £200 a year revenue from streams, which they're saying isn't uncommon, even for people who are writing for very very popular artists. And this person themselves, Fiona Bevan, is currently driving Uber despite being a successful songwriter and having some charting songs that she's personally written for successful artists. So, record players, how do we fix it?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get, just for full context, I'm trying to get the like value, like the actual monetary value for a stream. So
It
I'm
was
using a
in,
site.
I'm not sure where it's gone, but it was in the original link that I sent. So if you look in the WhatsApp, it'll be somewhere in there
Okay.
from me. I think it is something along the lines of just percentage wise. I think it's something along the lines of like 80% of the revenue, maybe higher, goes to a record label. The way the system is currently set up, and knowing that it's something like pennies or a pound per play, like depending on the contract, you're seeing basically nothing.
Yeah. Well,
As the
I've just
artist.
found like a royalties calculator page, and it going by Spotify. I just put in like 1,000 streams, and it's calculated that the take home royalties is $4 30
Yeah.
37
Yeah.
cents, which is, obviously insane. So you can see how even if you're like a major artist and you're having millions of streams or whatever, the take home is going to be minimal. I mean, it's an interesting one for me because I don't feel like this has been like a change where like the artists have been fucked over, especially more than they always have. I mean, it's bad. Obviously, it's really bad, and it needs changes. But when you look at the model of like CDs, or just the traditional model of like purchasing, it was a kind of similar thing where um, you know you had to when you sold records, you had to initially pay off your advance that you were given by the label before you saw anything. And for a lot of artists, they might not even do that, so they might just break even and not see any money. And obviously, the only revenue is touring. Um, but then once you do break even, then profits you get a small share. I seem to remember in my head it being something like 10%. So even when you're in profit, the take home is relative to what we're talking now with streams, where the label is taking the huge share.
Yeah, like you say, Harry, this isn't new. I mean, as I was thinking about this, I remembered that Jared Leto was involved in this a little bit. I remember he released a documentary back in 2013 called Artifact, which documented the issues that he was having with his label. So the issue that he was having is the label's basically suing him for breach of contract, because I think he hadn't released the number of albums that they expected him to release, something like that.
Yeah. There's
And
always like album commitments, right? With a record deal, it's that you've got to release this amount of albums in this time.
Yeah, and they were suing him for $30 million at the time. And I got a Rolling Stones article that was breaking down the amount of money that they would be getting from touring. So for the
30 Seconds to Mars, yeah,
that's
okay,
right, 30 Seconds to Mars. So for the album, it was one of the major albums. Let me pull it up. Not for This Is War, because that was a fairly new. This Is War. That was a fairly new album at the time, but there was a huge album that they did, A Beautiful Lie. That's the one. So for that album and for that tour, they made.
When did it come out? Sorry to interrupt. When did that album come out? Just to know how this fits in with like the kind of music like revenue options.
Can't remember. I'd have to go on Wikipedia.
Yeah, double check because it's good to get the context behind this.
Give me one sec. A Beautiful Lie, 2005. That came out.
Okay, so this would be like way before streaming, but obviously it's relevant to kind of
Like so the way that was broken down is that the artist got about 12% of the album sales.
Right. Yeah.
So he got about $2. The band got about $2 per album.
Right. And again, this as a reminder, this is once they've paid off their advance for the record. They weren't making anything, presumably. That seems to be the model. Yeah.
And then for the shows, they would bring in income, about $280,000 per show. Yeah. They would do 100 shows. So 280,000 times 100, which is what, 28 million?
Yeah, that's insane.
Out of that, 9.5 million would go to taxes and manager fees.
Yeah,
and then 4 million would be to be split amongst the band. So for 100 shows, they would get $1 million each, which is quite a bit. But then that's $1 million away from 28 million.
Right, and so you're saying that the what was left all went to the label.
The label, the managers, taxes.
The remainder, you're talking about 10 million or whatever left.
So basically the admin. And that's so you asked Jack, like how do we fix this situation? I think the problem is that there's no regulation around creative endeavors. Like for too long, creative people have been allowed to get manipulated and taken advantage of by business people, by distributors, in all creative endeavors. Film is the same sort of thing. Art itself is the same sort of thing. That there's no government regulation coming in and putting some kind of a value or putting some kind of a framework in place to protect artists.
I also think that it's kind of like it's almost like it's the truth is almost obfuscated for people that do have a casual interest in this, because all the condemnation seems to be at Spotify or whoever for not paying, but technically they are paying more than what we see. It's just that the agreement they have with the labels is that the labels will get the bulk. So I feel that the labels are just as responsible as they always have to points like we're talking with selling CDs.
Yeah, that's like
I think they're way more. I think it's almost entirely on the record companies themselves. The labels,
so they're both complicit. The streaming services and the labels are complicit.
To a degree, but then if the situation is set up so that the labels are happy with the amount of money they're earning by the streams of their artists on the services, the amount of money the services are giving the labels has to be a decent amount. Like, there's no way that the labels agree to a poor per play total of money. So it's then down to the labels to make sure that the artists are fairly compensated. That's not something that Spotify themselves are controlling.
No, I agree. I agree. No, it's a good point. When you put it like that, it's probably the labels that should take the brunt of the blame. But I guess I suppose you could say, like, that the kind of the streaming services have like now the ability and like the power to deviate that if they actually cared. I know obviously that, it's a business, so the real truth of it is they probably don't really care about anything beside the bottom line and their shareholders, presuming Spotify is publicly traded. But anyway, it's not like the labels are the only like titan that have control in this.
Mhm.
I mean, it brings us on, I guess, to an interesting deviation in terms of what do you guys think about like Tidal, because Tidal is like the service that has kind of come up and tried to look like the good guy in terms of paying more. I mean, again, when I used the calculator, I think it was like, a handful of streams, instead of equaling 0.01 cent, it was like 0.03 or something. So obviously in a small amount, it doesn't matter, but over a large amount of streams, it would have a big impact in terms of what artists make. So what do you guys think about something like Tidal?
Yeah, it's better, but it's better, but within the same sort of model, I suppose.
Yeah.
I suppose the problem, I think, is the model needs changing. And I think we should have started by sort of defining what the problem is in the first place, as in, like, what are the root causes of this issue? And if you really drill down, I guess the root cause is greed. The root cause is somebody saying, "I deserve more money than you, and I'm, I can take it from you, so I just will."
Yeah.
That's what the labels are doing fundamentally.
Yeah. And with the kind of lack of options. So now there's 3 major labels technically, and there's obviously the subdivisions. I remember when we were like teenagers, there were like, I believe, about 6 major labels. Obviously, it's still not great, but when there's less options, like with anything, competition kind of inspires like kind of progression.
Well, in the past, the labels were necessary for publishing, right, to get your records out to stores, etc.
Yeah.
Is that still necessary?
Yeah, I think part of this, it's kind of counter intuitive from the record labels, but seems to be working to maybe kind of stem some of the hemorrhaging from people being able to create and release their own music now. But it's almost like, because they're afraid of people being able to create release worthy music themselves at home or with like a small studio with an independent producer, they've got this, they're keeping this like stranglehold on whatever they can, and they're making incredibly unfair but profitable in the short term decisions that are going to come and bite them in the ass, because no one likes these huge record labels that, I can't think of a single article I've read for years where people have come out and gone like, oh, but Warner Brothers are really good, or yeah, but like Sony really backed me when I needed it, and they were really fair in the way they treated me. Same for Universal. Like, no one's got anything good to say about them.
I guess now I think about it, the kind of people that have the biggest power, even more than labels or streaming services, is the audience, right? They will govern it, because there was a kind of period of transition, right, where kind of people used to buy things, buy music, and then there was a large portion of people, but there was a large period where obviously like pirating and like torrenting became like the thing, and then a huge swath of people were doing that, and then there was no way of like labels and artists making money, and then kind of streaming came in to kind of fix that in a way, and that was enough for people to say, okay, this model works for me, I pay 5 or 10 quid a month, this works for me. So unfortunately, even though I would say I'd agree that probably the majority of artists and like people would realize that record labels don't do good by their artists, it's going to be the people that will like dictate how music is consumed. And if this works for like the audience, then everyone's got to fold in.
That's an interesting point, because there was an attached Guardian article to the one that we sent around this morning, from Guy Garvey, well, not from him, but in which Guy Garvey, who is the Elbow frontman, is saying that fans should pay more for their streaming subscription, and that should then be fed through to the artists that they're listening to.
The problem with that puts responsibility on the fans alone.
Yeah, I would also like to. It's paid this way. Theoretically, there's also a lot of this. Nobody, they've not released proper numbers for here's what we pay per stream, here's what we pay, because different record labels will have different deals for different sized artists with different streaming services. So what you earn from anywhere won't be the same in any other situation. Yep. But for me, a good step towards fixing this, working off the system that we have, because the ease of streaming services getting music to people is incredible, and people aren't going to give that up. So you need to work with what's already there and develop it into a better system than it currently is. So if we keep the framework they have now, I'd like to see something like an increase in sub cost, but the streaming services taking some power back. I don't know how the record labels would react to this, probably incredibly badly. But then direct revenue from that that extra level of cost is given streaming service and artist.
But that model already happens with Tidal, like I said, and even though I'm sure they have a decent amount of subscribers, it pales in comparison to something like Spotify or Apple Music. So that kind of proves that having that increase to subsidize the artist does that. Like the majority of people aren't going to do that. They're going to go for what's the cheapest.
I don't think that's necessarily the fault of the system, though. Like it was a very small Norwegian company being bought by Jay-Z, and Jay-Z was like the fact Jay-Z bought it was all of the news reported, and then the fact that Alicia Keys and Rihanna and I've forgotten his name, but the guy from Arcade Fire and all these people bought in and are like co-owners sort of thing. That was what everyone was interested in. It wasn't talking about it as a streaming service. So I think a lot of people that were mildly interested but only saw it in news articles and stuff, all they saw were the big names, and they weren't seeing come and stream here, come and listen to this here. Whereas the Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music like advertising campaigns are already going, and people already know that's what you get to stream your stuff on. I think it was more of a marketing thing than an actual like problem with the system of the setup with the service.
But I think enough time has passed that if there was going to be a sea change, it would have happened. Like now we're past. I know what you mean. I remember at the time it was really like high profile in terms of like the artists they got to back it or whatever. But like I feel like how long's Tidal been about for? 5 years at least. I would guess maybe longer.
5.
Obviously later than Spotify, but
6 years.
Okay. I feel like enough time has passed. That initial hype of who owns the company, whatever, has passed. And if there was ground to be made in terms of pay more, but the artists are going to benefit, it would have happened. At least if we're talking about the current streaming model we have, I don't necessarily see that. That's been like a case study or an experiment that I would say has not failed, but not really like taken off.
What would be an alternative either of you could recommend then? Something that's fairer for the artists.
I would say, okay, let's look at podcasts, right? We're able to distribute a podcast, and Apple have a platform, and I think Libsyn have a platform as well, where you can throw your stuff onto there. And I think there are even some services like Libsyn who they'll monetize it for you, etc. You need the minimalist of infrastructure in order to get that going. Perhaps these streaming services should offer something along those lines. Like I know that's not what they do. That's not their business.
You're talking to artists to upload on their own.
Yeah, exactly. And to have like a proper infrastructure in place.
Yeah.
for monetization and basically do the job of the record companies. And you could even include that that pay a little bit extra, and maybe they could even have their own exclusives. You pay that little bit extra, and you get all these exclusive releases. The latest Black Eyed Peas, you only get if you pay that little bit extra. But you also get these independent artists that are up and coming as well.
What can I pay to not get the Black Eyed Peas?
I agree. I think something like that's probably a good idea. I mean, a lot of this is kind of like what you're talking about, Dennis, is kind of almost like a variation of other models that do exist. I'd probably say like one that's quite interesting, and I don't know if it would necessarily be like the premium or the most popular way of distribution, but is kind of like things the model that you get on like sites like Bandcamp or like the websites where you like contribute pre-release,
the ones like
like Kickstarter, like with Protest the Hero doing it. That's the main thing that I'm thinking of. But for people that don't know, it would be the kind of thing where artists upload the work or whatever, or they announce a project, you then fund them. So it's almost like you're a shareholder in that, and the amount you pay determines the kind of reward you get. So if you pay 50 quid, you get a vinyl and a shirt. If you pay 20 quid, you just get the CD. If you pay 5 quid, you just get the digital download. You can pick. So you've got the control. Obviously, I guess it still means that the audience would pay more versus paying just a £10 a month and not worrying about it. But I think that's at least a good model for like bands that people are like really into.
I think specifically, I've just looked up the Protest one on Indiegogo because you reminded me of that one specifically. I think like you said, for a band like that, their fans absolutely love them, and they're not on the level of commercial success where they could negotiate a really good deal with a record company. It's perfect because I'm looking at these numbers now. Like we're saying, with you need obviously all the overheads of creating the record in the first place before you can get out and tour or earn any stream revenue at all. You got all of those overheads. They asked for £94,000 on their goal, and between 8,361 people donating, they earned 257,000, almost 258,000, which is 270% of what they asked for.
Yeah,
which is pretty wild. You do lose, this is, I say lose. This includes album sales, potential album sales, but also thinking about who your album sales now compared to the album sales 20 years ago are going to be absolutely negligible in terms of revenue.
It's not going to be a moneymaker.
Yeah. So being able to a system like this where you can pre-order an album and the band actually gets money from you pre-ordering an album is insane. It's almost
like they're getting the advance from the public.
Yeah.
The fans. Yeah.
It's almost like they've taken the old system and done it when no one else is doing it.
Yeah.
What you say, Dennis?
You're getting something of value as well, because I know there are guys like Buckethead who did limited edition vinyls and distributed that, and that becomes a collectible at some point.
Yeah, right. I guess the only way where that kind of system falls is kind of like you need like the initial hype or the core fan base. So if you're a new band, it's almost like impossible to like do that if you're asking for any like decent amount of money, which is obviously where you get the benefit you might get of being like signed to a label is then you've got like the marketing and they get you on radio, all of that stuff. So that's,
well, you could create some controversy using social media. For instance, I reckon Slow Tie could probably do something like that, right? He's got quite a bit of hype.
What I'm saying is to do the model that we were talking about in terms of like a Kickstarter type thing, you would need to be established to a certain degree and have like a fan base.
But look at Slow Tie. He's already got a fan base.
Yeah, but he's successful as fuck.
But yeah, he is successful as fuck, true, but he sort of came up from controversy. But the way that I see it, he didn't come up from releasing a bunch of albums, people knowing him that way. He came up from being noticed off of social media, etc.
I will know that I've made it in any way at all when people buy dice, right, of my fucking band. I'll try and get it.
Yeah, I can't see. Is that a protest?
Let me
Dice?
let me set my zoom in. Yeah, go 500. Where's that?
Yeah, that's better.
Ah, nice. PTH.
Yeah, the protest die. I don't need a bag of 5d6 dice.
That's
I got one
the best marketing tool
because
you've got
protests
there.
were selling them.
Yeah, like they'll be rocked on every ghetto corner. Promoting your bands.
Yeah. Okay, so we're saying kind of one of the better ways that the artist can solve this problem is through diversification of revenue source.
Does that, I was going to ask this, does that sort of bode, like, is that, like, should that be a warning sign for the labels in that could potentially, if the labels keep doing these bad deals and artists just eventually just get sick of it, could the future just be like every new band basically just crowdfunds their latest album?
I think whatever it becomes, it needs to be accessible and cheap for the audience. If you can facilitate those two options, then people will go to it. But if there's a barrier to entry or it's more expensive, that's when then you fall into a trap, and then you go with the old faithful option, which again the creators get screwed.
I think it's part of the problem is the size of the record labels as well, because they're such huge companies. They need massive revenue turnover to survive without having to downsize. So they're almost in a space where they can't afford to
Compromise.
be fair, because if they're fair and they give people what they deserve for creating all this revenue for the company to have in the first place, then they have to take a step back, and one of the other two competitors that is up there will move into that real estate that they've freed up.
Yeah, it is a rock and a hard place for kind of each element or each part, each part of this, streaming services, record labels, and artists. It's kind of like it's going to be impossible to find that balance. But I mean, definitely, I think probably agreeing with you guys that the record labels are the one that's at fault.
Which is why we're happy to announce the Record Players streaming service.
Available for free, self-distributed.
Self-made, self-distributed, no payment from us. No payment to us.
Yeah, so that's the other thing that I'm annoyed about. This is a different discussion, so I'm not going to get into it, but I'm annoyed with Spotify with kind of streaming exclusivity as well, which completely undermines kind of what I feel like podcasts are. But this is a minefield. But yeah, I got my beef with Spotify in particular.
We may or may not circle back to that in a future discussion, depending how our podcast settles on different services. Okay, so am I right in saying that what we would probably look for if we were trying to fix this the streaming service payment problem, what we would aim for is something that listens more to the preferences of the audience that's using the service. It's cheaper and accessible, and that has a kind of a crowdfunding element for a streaming service is difficult, but something along the lines of pre purchases for albums. So you're still paying your streaming service, but they go, hey, next week this person's releasing an album. They're partnering with us, and you can get a free bag of dice, or they'll come and like sing at your kid's birthday party if you pay us this amount extra, and we'll split that with the artist. Have I missed anything that we've kind of gone through there?
Yeah, something of that ilk. Yeah, I mean the core price probably needs to stay the same to retain the audience. But if there's something where you can contribute and you get extra from it, so it's kind of almost like a hybrid between streaming services and like a Kickstarter model, that could potentially work. As long as the artist is then pocketing all of that money. Well, besides the kind of streaming services getting their own take, but yeah, taking the label out of the equation.
Yeah, so if it's, I found it a little bit earlier, so I want to go through it now. The record labels at the moment can keep up to 82% of the royalties from a stream because it's done as a sale, whereas what Nile Rodgers was arguing to the members of parliament that are currently doing an inquest about it in England, I think.
Is Nile Rodgers English?
I don't think so.
He was just here.
Yeah, he was just. They had him on Skype actually. He's
okay.
He's wearing an absolutely gangster suit, and he's sat in front of a wall that's covered in platinum and gold records as well.
Yeah.
And he's just it's quite funny reading what he's actually said, because he was like, I didn't even know it was a problem because I just live on tour, so all of my money is from tour. I didn't even know. And then this year, obviously, I couldn't tour, and the world's gone to shit. Is essentially what he's saying.
Yeah. It's now more than ever that these things have to be looked at. I mean, it seems like there's in general we're in like a kind of transitional period with like technology, because you look at things like kind of like now like things like loot boxes in gaming, that's a focus for like governments of the world.
I hate loot boxes, man.
Yeah, you look at things about like kind of like misinformation, regarding things with politics, with like social media. So it's kind of like music streaming. That's just another thing that's on the pile of kind of issues with technology not catching up.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure it will come, but
all right. So I think that's good. What we had before with our solutions. I'm gonna have my people talk to your people. We'll have our people talk to music's people. We'll get something sorted.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds good for me.
Cool, let's do it.
See you guys in a bit.
Yeah.
Laters.